Here's a quick look into today's episode.
As well, but we put out one document and we called it Standing Intent. 3 things: be ready, do the right thing, win as a team. 5 points that I would give, everybody in that category who asked that question. Be yourself, but be the best version of yourself. If you try to be, like somebody else, it's going to be inauthentic and it's not really going to get you very far. Yeah, I think if you don't have professional, performance anxiety, then, one, you're probably a little bit overconfident in your own abilities. And 2, maybe you just don't care enough, or some combination of the two. If you really care about doing the right thing for the right reasons, and you are humble and, you know what your weaknesses are, then you should have some professional anxiety and then some. But, I think probably the first time I really felt that, was at West Point when the academics started. I remember the first summer I was kind of looking around like, man, this guy can't do any push-ups. How are you getting into West Point? And then you get in the classroom and you're like, oh, I know how he got here. He's really smart. And I thought I was smart. I did okay in high school. And now I'm the dumbest guy in every class. And, the whole quote from John McCain, he said in this speech that he gave at the Naval Academy right before he died, he was talking about his service. And he said, many of you will risk everything for your country. You will make sacrifices for your fellow Americans who won't be asked to make sacrifices for you. That's your call. Thank you for accepting it. I promise there will be compensations for the hard times you endure. You will have lives of adventure. You will have the best company, and you will know a satisfaction far more sublime than pleasure. Friends like you, the opportunities to serve in the organizations that we've described and do some of the things that you mentioned, they're all kind of marked by that, adventure and good company. And, I hope I can pay some of that forward.
Welcome to another episode of Teach Me to Fish, where our purpose is to help leaders better understand what drives people. In today's world, the core of recruiting and retaining talent revolves around leadership. And not just average leadership, but motivated, values-based, inspirational leadership. Our purpose is to get a little bit better every day. Progress equals small victories and stacking habits. Habits like getting up early, working your butt off, learning something new, being positive, and surrounding yourself with phenomenal people.
Hey, buddy.
My man.
How you doing?
So
Aloha
good it's
Friday.
criminal. If you could see my view right here, looking out my front window, you'd be jealous. How are you? How are you this morning or afternoon for you?
I'm good. How's the audio?
It sounds perfect. It sounds like you're sitting in the chair right in front of me. You look good. Looking healthy.
My LeClair's General Store mug.
Yes. I always see that. And I remember when I used to go into your office and I would see like you had the metal mugs, we have like a dozen of those things here.
Yeah, with the parachute on.
The craziest place that I saw, look at this lady.
I have to say
Hey,
hi. How's it going?
Good. Aloha Friday.
I know. You look great. Tell Tanya I said hi.
I will.
Okay.
I will.
When are you guys coming back?
Hopefully Christmas. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Have a good podcast.
I'm going to keep that. I'll keep that in there. I'll put that in. Christy always says, she goes, make sure you talk about me. The craziest place I ever saw one of those LeClair's mugs was I went to Alaska. I went to the Black Rapids training area. And I'm sitting there, we're going through the Arctic school, and I look across the room, and I just see some guy sitting there, and he's drinking out of a metal coffee mug, and it's a LeClair's General Store, coffee mug. And I looked at it, and then I walked over, and I was like, hey, I know you got that mug. That's my brother's store, my mom and dad there. And he looked at my name tag on my uniform, and he was like, that's your brother?
Love that place.
Yeah. Well, hey, the way I like to, kind of get these things started off is I'll do like a quick little intro, do it a little bit different today than some of the other days. And then kind of the roadmap of everything, there's about 7 or 8 different topics that we'll talk about, but we'll kind of go in an order and we'll take it in whatever direction it kind of goes. But I think that based off the things that we talked about over the last couple months is like, I think the theme of the things that me and you always talk about is like, our real friends and the power of relationships and the people that we can count on, and like, some of those, the good times, the not so good times, the tough times, but as you serve this long in the Army, you get fewer and fewer people that you can kind of count on at specific moments. You got a ton of acquaintances, right? And then you got, your board of directors, your people that are kind of real tight in with you. And I think that we'll kind of stem off from there. How does that sound?
Perfect.
Well, for like some of the folks that don't know who Dave Webb is, I wanted to do it a little bit different today and kind of go through, some of the things that you've done, because it's a lot easier for me to kind of quickly go through it than it is. And Dave, you'd be like super uncomfortable, like going through one thing after the next. For people that don't know who Dave Webb is, like you went to West Point, you graduated from there. You spent most of your career either in Hawaii, the 25th Infantry Division, or somewhere in Georgia, where mostly the 75th Ranger Regiment. And, you're a platoon leader. You were in the 25th Infantry Division growing up there with a ton of phenomenal people and leaders. And you went to 275. After that captain's career course, back to the 25th Infantry Division as a company commander, back to 175. That's where me and you met. Me, you, Christy, Tanya, we all got to know each other in 175 as captains and then as majors. And then we went off and did our stuff. You went to Stanford for a little while doing the Downing Scholars. Then we did our field grade time. You were in the 25th Infantry Division. And then you stayed out here for another couple of years. Go figure. Stay in Hawaii as much as you possibly can. But, phenomenal mission while you're out here. But, with the Indo-PACOM commander as his aide. Were you that for 2 years? One year with both?
Years, yeah. Crazy. I think Rob Shaw had the record. He was a couple years with General Milley, and then I smashed his record because I did 1 year with Harris and then 2 years with Admiral Davidson. So yeah, 3 years. I don't recommend being an aide for 3 years, but wow, I learned a lot.
Yeah. After that, then we kind of switched in the night, like I was at Fort Bragg and I got no news that I was coming to Hawaii, and you were in Hawaii and you got news you were going to Fort Bragg, where you were a battalion commander out there in the 82nd, so we kind of traded places there, and then back to the 75th Ranger Regiment to be a Ranger Battalion commander, which is what you just wrapped up being a Ranger Battalion commander there, and now you'll be heading off to some form of the War College here soon. For folks like, that's a long career, and the reason I wanted to kind of go through that and up front is a lot of times it's like, what is the person that we're talking to, like, from a context, like what experience does that person have? So as we go through some of these things that we're going to talk about today, now you can kind of see some of that background. But Dave, I always love to hear from people, like right up front, like when people hear your name, like what are some of the things, like what is it that you hope people kind of feel when they hear your name?
Well, you get asked a lot to talk about, your values or your priorities. And, I hope that when people think about me, they would say the same couple of things that I would say, are my values and my priorities. And they would, have seen those things in my life, and those would be the things that, that would come to mind when they hear my name. So first and foremost, faith, and then family, and then service. And, my time doesn't always align with those the way that, my heart does, but, I hope that people see those things in me and would think about those things when they hear my name.
Well, I can tell you that when I got to know you, right off the bat, like the things that you valued and the things that were important to you were the same things that were important to me and Christy and you and Tanya. And so like we instantly, knew that this is a family that values the same things. And this is a, family that cares about soldiers just as much as we care about our own family.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you join in the first place, real quick? I know you come from a military family, but like why you joined in the first place?
Yeah, well, I am a third generation West Point grad and Army officer. And as you know, a couple uncles, a couple cousins, my brother-in-law all went to West Point and served in the Army. So a bit of a family tradition. I was probably a little brainwashed growing up. I sometimes say I've been in the Army my whole life because I'm an Army brat, and you know only applied to West Point, and thankfully I got in, and the rest has been history since then. I grew up, playing GI Joes and running around the woods and pretending like I was on secret missions, and thankfully I've been able to have a profession, a career, so to speak, doing what I wanted to do as a young child. I've had, a couple second thoughts along the way. I got to West Point. I was like, man, I actually wanted to do this. What am I doing here? And I've had times when I've, wanted to get out of the Army and do other things, but I think it was something I always wanted to do. And I'm really thankful for the opportunities to serve.
Yeah. And, sometimes I think about like, how did I become so close and so much, friends with so many folks that went to West Point, and now Ryan's there right now. But like, how did I become friends as an ROTC kid growing up? Why didn't I have necessarily more friends as ROTC, over the years? And I feel like it's about 50-50. But I think that the values and the people that I've gotten to know over the years is the reason that I've become so close with so many people that graduated from that school.
Mm. Well, yeah, I know, you're proud of Ryan. I think I told you, when she got into West Point, I don't think I've ever been so happy for somebody else's kid. I just was so happy and proud of her, and I know that you are as well. But it's going to be great for her, and I can't wait to see what she does beyond West Point. It's awesome.
Well, I feel like the same way when somebody else's children like ask me like a question, like I got a tour of one of the ships when Don Neal's son showed up here in port on his way from the South China Sea heading back to San Diego, and little Donald gave me a tour of his ship. He's the supply officer for the ship. And it was like getting a tour from Hunter or getting a tour from Scotty someday, and like when they ask me questions, my friends' kids, and they say like, what do you think about me serving? Or do you think I should go be enlisted for the first couple of years? Like it makes me so proud, but it also makes me feel like it's like our purpose, right? Is to set a good example for them and to help encourage them if that's something that they want to do. And then I feel so honored that if someone says, I want to do the same things that you and Uncle Dave did, it's like you definitely set a good example for them if that's the things that they're saying.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. And she's always like, I'm going to do the same thing. Like who kind of coached you along the way? Well, Uncle Rob did. And, she calls like Uncle RJ, and I was like, well, you can't call the calm Uncle RJ, all the time. So, but then you decided along the way, I'm sure there was like 100 points, where you say, how much longer am I going to stay in the Army?
Yeah.
Was there any particular moment like along the way, where you were like, that was like the tipping point where you just decided like, I'm going to do this until I can't do it anymore?
Yeah. I mean, I think you're underestimating by saying only 100 points, where I thought maybe I wanted to do something else. So I think I tried to quit West Point a couple of times, and I've thought about getting out at every rank, and maybe even every day since I've been in. But I think what really was a turning point for me, that I wanted to stay in for a while and keep leading, was being a second time platoon leader in the Ranger Regiment. My first platoon leader experience was great. My second one was even better. And then, had some decisions to make. Do I go to the captain's course and continue on, or, do I choose something else and kind of off ramp? Had some really good mentors, convinced me that being a company commander was the right thing to do, and loved it. And then had an opportunity to command another company. But I think, those couple of years, when most people, I think, make their decision on whether they're going to, just do that first term or they're going to continue on. I was fortunate to, be at the tip of the spear with some great folks doing some things that I really believed in. People like you and And, as you remember, those were some pretty heavy times. We were always either deployed or getting ready to deploy. And, as stressful as it was and challenging, it was incredibly fulfilling and, sort of addicting. And, I've been kind of chasing those adventures in good company, which is, a theme that, kind of resonates with me. But, those things that, you know, it's like lightning in a bottle, once you got it, you got to hold on to it.
Yeah. And we kind of, everybody talks about it like a little bit, maybe like later on in their career, like when they start to say, well, what do you miss about being in the Army? And they say, well, I miss the people the most. Or what are you looking forward to the most about getting back out to the line? And they always say, well, I'm looking forward to getting back out there with the people, but every once in a while, I think you start to realize, maybe for a second, like I am with lightning in a bottle is happening right now. And like one of those days where like me and you and Chris and Ed would get in the 90s machine and we would go to lunch together, the four of us. And it was like, it was a moment where you were like, yeah, this is a moment where everything is working, because like instead of working against each other, we're all working together to help each other, right? And because of those, the good company and the friends and the relationships that you have, it makes everything a little bit better. And vice versa, when you have those moments where it's not so good, everything can get more stressful, and it's harder, and it's unnecessarily harder because it's already a hard enough profession, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think though, even though the staff jobs and some of the times when, you're not leading and you're not at the tip of the spear, aren't exactly what you signed up for, there's still adventures and good company everywhere, that you go in the military. And, that's what kind of keeps me coming back on top of, all the service and the higher calling and, those things.
Yeah.
Brought me.
How has this been like, where were you in your career when you got married and you started to have a family? Where were you guys?
We got married in between IOBC and Ranger School, which I don't recommend. I went right from my honeymoon to Ranger School. We'd been in Maui, and all the calluses that I had built up during OBC on my feet, were washed away by the sand in the salt water. So I went right into Ranger School from my honeymoon. Tanya wasn't thrilled about that, and I got a little bit of an extended stay because I had to do mountains twice. And so, yeah, we got married during that time period, then jumped in the car, drove out to Fort Lewis, and I joined Deuce 4, and we deployed shortly thereafter to Mosul for a year, which kind of started the crazy train for Tanya and I. And then poor Tanya, I think she thought, we might just do this military thing for a little while. We're still doing it. And I think I was deployed part of every year for those first 10 years that we were married, and had I had all three of the kids, during those 10 years. So kind of a wild time until I got to grad school and finally was able to like take a little bit of a
Mm-hmm.
breather and get to know the family a little bit. And the second half of the career hasn't been much slower, but it's been a little bit better for the family, and I think my perspective has adjusted a little bit accordingly.
Yeah. I often tell people, and me and Christy got married when I was a sergeant, and I was getting ready to start the Green and Gold program, and so she's been with me the whole time. But I often talk about how, when we got married, it was such a game changer for me, and how it helped kind of refocus me. And then when we had the boys, like it was a whole nother level of like, I need to do well to set a good example for them, or to support them, whatever it might be. So there was like a whole nother level when you started to add family to what it is we do. And then how you compare, what you do in the Army and the families that you're supporting with what the experiences that you have raising a family and having a family. Have you had a similar opportunities to help families with, knowing that you've got the experience of going through some tough times as a family?
Yeah, I think something you just said, struck me. I think that being being an officer in the Army, helps me be a better, husband and father, but being a husband and father helps me be a better, officer in the Army because, there are so many parallels about, relationships and team building and leadership. And, I think that there's no way I would have, had the resilience, and kind of balance in my life to go through all of the things that we've been through if I didn't have, I think about the movie Hook where, they had to have their happy thoughts to be able to fly, right? Which is kind of a silly analogy, but, if I didn't have, that better half or, when you bring the kids into it, that joy that comes from, being, Tanya's husband and a dad to Michaela, Scott, and Knox, there's no way that I could have, push through, some of the tough times. And, certainly, to say that she's my better half would be an understatement. But, Tanya's, as you know, is a trained therapist. She gives me a lot of unsolicited free therapy, which helps. But, also just being a friend and, a counter, kind of balance to, some of the stress and the things that we go through at work. And and I know you're this way with your kids, they're my best friends. I mean, I spend, just about all my free time, just got back from the gym with the two boys and, you know, I love spending time with them and don't know where I would be, if I didn't have them in my life. So I think that kind of answers your question, but I think you also were kind of asking about, if I've been able to, take some of those things and give them back. One thing that, I didn't learn until probably too late in my career, is the importance of, quality time. I mean, you're never going to be able to give your family quantity of time and, but what you can do with the time that you do have, whether it's in the evenings after work or on the weekends, is you can try to make that time quality, be present in their lives and give as much as you can, and make that time really count.
Yeah. And I mean, I've known you guys for so long now. And like every time I come to last time I was at Fort Benning, we spent hours together and like, Tanya's been a supporter for me too. Like she'll coach us on things. When you guys were when we were in Hawaii together, like we would sit times on the back porch and like, as teammates, we talk about it takes a tribe to raise our kids. But I also think like we all need our tribe as well, like friends, that you can count on and then they can call you like the moment when at your change of command, like when I couldn't be at your change of command, but like Ed calls me and like gets me on FaceTime and it's you and Chris and everybody standing in your living room. And it's like, I got 2 or 3 minutes to, feel like people are thinking about you, and that means the world to me. And, but that's the kind of friendship, that's the kind of team that we've created.
Yeah, you're right. And I'm not a rich man, but, I have a wealth of real friends, as Arthur Brooks would say. He writes in his book Strength to Strength, which is a great one, especially for guys our age. That there's real friends and there's deal friends, and deal friends are transactional. They're just interested in what you can do for them. But real friends, they hurt when you're hurting. They're happy for you when things are going well for you. And I'm super blessed to have so many real friends, like you and Christy and so many others that you mentioned. It's really awesome.
Yeah. And those real friends are the ones that like, you can just call out of the blue, send them a text message like, this is what I'm thinking about. This is what I'm about to go through. What do you think? And they know who you are, so you don't have to do a ton of context, with it. Or when we're out on a walk, just kind of talking through what some of those things are. And I feel like it's important to know who those people are that you can talk through for different circumstances and stuff. How many other folks have you had throughout your career? Other friends, other counterparts, NCO counterparts, people that you've gone from like one unit to the next that they're not in that same category like you're talking about parenting together, but it's like I've got this person that I can count on if I've gotta get ready to go to this school, or we're getting ready to go do this exercise, and this person's kind of an expert in that area. What are some of your thoughts on those kind of relationships?
Yeah, I didn't love my time at West Point. As I said, it wasn't probably the best way to spend your 18 to 21 years as far as fun goes. But what you do get out of times like that, or I'm sure you got as you're when you were young and enlisted in the Ranger Regiment, is you go through hard times with people, you get close. And my three best friends from West Point are still my three best friends. And it's not just those three, it's that whole class. And I know a lot of those folks, because we're all about the same year group. And just incredible Americans that we've been through hard times together, and from every duty station. And I think part of the reason that we all have such fondness for our time in certain units is certain units kind of keep the same sphere of influence, and the same bunch of folks together, whether they you know are in the unit at the time, or they've gone elsewhere. And so that connective tissue that we have from places like the 25th or the 82nd or the Ranger Regiment or so many other units, it's those are real friends that and it's especially cool when our spouses are friends, our kids are friends,
Yeah.
and then we've got mutual friends that maybe we hadn't known before, but you've got a guy who's coming out here that you're buddies with, and you tell him to give me a call when he gets to Fort Benning, and and we've got that instant connection because of the mutual friendship.
Yeah. I love that about the Army. My favorite thing about the Army is when people spend that first few minutes and they're like, where'd you come from? What unit were you in? You knew this person, or you get a heads up that someone's coming. I vouch for this person. The simple, like, he's a good dude, like, you can count on this person, or I recommend this person to come to your unit. You should bring them in. They're coming. He or she's a good dude. And I love having those conversations. I love that about the Army. It's one of my favorite things about the Army, which is like when people say, like, what makes somebody a good dude, like that there's a couple things that we always kind of rack and stack, and we say these are the things that make somebody a good dude, and people, they think it's oversimplification when you say, like, being a great teammate, but, like, what is being an ideal teammate? And, like, what is when someone says, like, that's a good dude, that they're a great teammate? When you start to describe, like, what that is to some of the younger folks, like, this is what being a great teammate is.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. One of the books that I recommend to people probably most often is Patrick Lencioni's book, The Ideal Team Player. And you don't really have to read the book to get the concept, but he draws a Venn diagram, three circles that overlap in the middle, and the different circles are, he says humble, hungry, smart, and I replace with slightly, Army kind of versions of that. And I just say, you know, humility, initiative, and competence. And, you don't want to be just one or just two out of those three. You want your teammates, and you want to be, all three, and be in the center of that Venn diagram. So I even put that in, my initial counseling document that I give to the leaders is, on the front side of the form is, or the memo is what the Army says about leadership, the leader requirements model, where, you've got the attributes and the competencies, and then on the back, I just talk about being an ideal team player and being those three things that I.
Yeah. When you shared with me, like, what that initial counseling memo looks like for, like, when you were a battalion commander, but, like, you also told me about, like, how there's a lot of things that you kind of think about, and there's, like, you could take 10 pages of notes, or you could take, like, document after document after document, and kind of say, this is what your expectations are. But the way you approached it was you started to say less is more, right? And you oversimplify, like, keep simplifying, and to get it into, like, one or two pages. What were your thoughts when when it comes to developing, like, those kind of documents to help people understand what you're thinking?
Yeah, everybody prepares for command, in their own way. And the pre-command course, encourages you to write out, vision statements and leader philosophies and things like that. And, you know, I before I took command, it was a weird time frame. It was like COVID year, March. I was supposed to meet my unit overseas. They were stuck overseas and I was stuck at Fort Bragg because of the stop moves. And so I had some time, and it was great because my sergeant major was in the same boat. We took command on the same day together and gave up on the same day together. He's a great guy, and we had a great relationship. But we had a chance to talk about some of these things. I wrote so much during those couple of weeks. Just putting a lot of thoughts on paper about what I wanted to do in command, and at the end of the day, I decided to not share much of that. It was really helpful to write it all down, because it kind of helped me know what I thought, and some of the things that I wanted to do. But the only two things that, and I had my sergeant major look it over and sign it as well. But we put out one document, and it was one page, and we called it Standing Intent, and it was pretty simple, and it was sticky enough that I could remember it and I could say it over and over every time I talk to people, and we put it all over our battalion footprint. But three things: be ready, do the right thing, win as a team. And the document briefly explained what I meant by be ready, what I meant by do the right thing, and what I meant by win as a team. I mean, what I wanted was if people didn't remember much, about what we expected, they could probably remember those three things, and they'd hear it enough from us, and they'd see it all over the footprint, and it would be sticky and all encompassing in terms of what we were going to do as a team. I didn't want to do a whole lot of like, this is what I like, or this is what I don't like, or here's my non-negotiables or my red lines or any of that, because I didn't want it to be about me. I wanted it to be more about the vision for the organization, and for future execution. And yeah, it's just a preference. Some people put out some great products that are 20 pages long, and then maybe that works for them, but for me, I felt it was more important to just make it short and punchy, and hopefully memorable, and then something that I could kind of go back to every time I talk to groups of soldiers. In my most recent battalion command, I did even less than that. All I did was training guidance, and I called it a New Year's note, but I'd send a note right around the holidays, which was kind of a good time for reflection and forward thinking, and just reestablish, hey, this is vision for the battalion. Here's our top priorities, and here's some like kind of written updates to our training guidance. So that's how I chose to prepare and kind of message on a macro level.
Yeah, I think especially for the younger folks, there can be a misconception that like when you put out one document, that it was easy for you, that it was easy to just, because you kept it simple, be ready, be professional, be great teamwork, right? Well, it seems simple, but it wasn't. There was lots of work that goes into simplifying something into, like, how does the statement go? Like if, I'm sorry, I didn't have enough time, so I gave you 10 pages,
right,
worth of notes. I didn't have enough time to
sorry for the long letter. If I had more time, it would be shorter.
I'd have got it shorter, and it would have been, more effective. Now, similarly, Joe McCormick, who wrote several great books, right, on how to make a bigger impact by saying less, and he's got 3 books out now. But his podcast, just saying, it's usually like 10 minutes, right, and it's just real quick. But one of the ones I recently listened to talked about the small little conversations that we have with people on a daily basis are arguably more important than those hour-long conversations, or the time where you're standing up there giving a bunch of guidance or a bunch of instruction, right? People remember a tiny bit of that, right? But what they remember is those consistent little 30 seconds here, 2 minutes there. They saw you at this moment. And it's those that would seemingly be not important conversations are becoming more important over time. And they're the genuine, they're the moments. It's when people say things like that's the real you, that's who you are as a leader, not the person that prepared this long speech or prepared this long documents, to give to people. But then you're different when you see them, in person. That's kind of resonated with me, and I'm seeing it more and more now that I've heard him articulate it, and now I see it on a daily basis when I have these conversations with other leaders or with other people.
Yeah, I love those books, and Joe McCormick. And for anyone listening, if you haven't read Brief, and that's one of the other books that I recommend often. I'm not as brief speaking, but I try to be real brief and concise in writing. But I think that it is super important, at least for me. Like if you give me 10 pages to read, who knows which of those points in those 10 pages I'm going to retain and internalize. But if you give me one page with 3 bullet points, I can remember those, and I can probably internalize those a little bit easier. And I think the other point that he makes, what does he call it, the elusive 600 or something like that, that we can, our brains can kind of handle, what is it, 750 words a minute, but we can only speak, what is it? Even people who speak really fast, it's only about 150 words a minute. So those, what are people's brains doing during those other 600 words that they've got the capacity for? They're thinking about what's for lunch, or they're thinking about something else, right? And so how do you manage that? And what I would recommend is just like he says, keep it brief and just get to the point, and then you give the time back to the audience, and then they can ask you what's on their mind, or they tell you what's on their mind. But I think for me in written communication, I think it does take a lot of time and effort to keep something brief, but that time and effort I think is well spent if you want people to really internalize it.
What has been some of the area, like you've had a lot of opportunity both to receive like leader development and then to also be a part of, given leader development or providing opportunities for leader development over the years, while it's fresh on your mind and you're just coming out of another battalion command. But like, what's some of the most common advice that has resonated with people over the years, whether it's young officers or other, senior NCOs, whatever it might be?
Yeah. I think that, probably the group that asks that question that, or they ask the question the most often is like the cadets and the lieutenants. They ask, what does it take to be a successful lieutenant? Or, they're already starting to think about like what they want to do beyond their lieutenant time. But, I started, just kind of had this, 5 points that I would give, everybody in that category who asked that question. And first point was be yourself, but be the best version of yourself, right? So, if you try to be, like somebody else, it's going to be inauthentic and it's not really going to get you very far. But if you be the best version of yourself, at least you're authentic. You may not be that good, but you're at least going to be genuine. Mm-hmm. And hopefully if you're the best version of yourself and, you're already in that position, you're going to be pretty darn good. The second one is, confidence and humility. And it's not like a either or thing. It's not a balance thing. It kind of goes back to Lencioni's, Venn diagram, but you can be 100% confident and 100% humble. And, if you think about the best leaders that you've ever known, they're 100% confident and 100% humble. So, try to be both of those. And I always give them a quick example of like a time, that everybody's found themselves, kind of having a situation like this where you can be both in the same moment. You get a mission from your higher headquarters, and then you come back, maybe you're a platoon leader, you come back to your squad leaders and you say, hey guys, we got to go take this hill. And, rather than just being like, here's the plan, let's move out, you ask them, what do you guys think? Mm-hmm. How do you guys think we ought to do it? And you hear from them and you listen to them and you take their recommendations into consideration. I mean, that's the humility part of it. But then the confidence part is, summing it all up and being like, okay, first squad, you're doing this. Second squad, you're doing that. doing that. Weapon squad, you got this. Here's the timeline. Here's coordinating instructions. Let's move out. And that's the confidence part of it, right? And you can be confident and humble at the same time. So that's number two. Number three is just like reminding these guys that they have to be the moral compass for their unit, and they're prepared for it. That's one thing that regardless of your commissioning source, you're prepared to be that moral compass. You know what right and wrong are, and what they need to hear, I think, is that when they go into that platoon, that platoon's going to go right up to that line that platoon leader sets as the line, and if that platoon leader has no line, then the platoon's not going to have a line, and they're going to push it well beyond where they need to. But that platoon leader holds the line, sets the line, shows them, what's right and what's wrong, and enforces that. That's the standard. So be comfortable being that moral compass. Number four is know the knowable in time to be useful. And what I tell them, with that is, just about everything you need to know as a lieutenant. And this is probably all levels of the Army, but especially, the earlier levels, is everything you know is written down somewhere. Somebody already knows it. But unfortunately, and I'm guilty of this too, is, you usually don't know all those important things until right before you're about to leave that job and go into a new job, right? So like, why don't you, dig into the doctrine a little bit, on the front end, or ask the subject matter experts on the front end, so those knowable things, in time for it to be useful. And then the last one is to just have fun. I think that, we all need reminders, but, leadership, the opportunity to be a leader in the Army is a blessing. It's a gift, and if we look at it that way and we attack every day as an opportunity as opposed to something, you hear people say, it's not have to, it's get to, right?
Yeah.
If you treat it like that, and sometimes you got to remind yourself and give yourself a little pep talk in the morning, but, have fun with it. Leadership's, it's an awesome blessing. So those are 5 things that I finally wrote them all down and, would give them to lieutenants, as part of their initial counseling, or if you have CTLT cadets, or, you're talking to somebody who's interested in, maybe going into the military and they wonder what it takes. That was kind of my little stump speech that I would give to these young folks. And it applies really at every level, but especially for those newer leaders.
That's a great segue when you said confidence and humility, and the confidence to be confident in yourself, but be humble at the same time, is a perfect segue into a topic that I think everybody starts to get to, whether it be in the Ranger Regiment or when you start to get into the command levels or command sergeant major levels, and that's imposter syndrome. And then it's this, I know I can do it, but then as soon as you get told it's time to go do it, you're like, oh my God, oh shit,
Yeah.
and my most recent, the moment that hit me the most was when I found out I made colonel, right? Like you knew you were going to, kind of, because you knew the system that has, what your evaluations say, right? And so you're like, okay, I think there's a pretty good chance that this is going to happen, right? But as soon as I saw my name on paper, I was like, oh shit. Like, now you have to do the things that someone thought you had the potential to do, right? And imposter syndrome hit me so hard, and I had a lot of years in the Army, recently when I found out about that. Will you talk about like imposter syndrome and how many times throughout our career, like you felt in the Ranger Regiment, like as just an absolute imposter, because of the people that you've been surrounded with?
Yeah. I think if you don't have professional, performance anxiety, then, one, you're probably a little bit overconfident in your own abilities. And 2, maybe you just don't care enough, or some combination of the two. If you really care about doing the right thing for the right reasons, and you are humble, and what your weaknesses are, then you should have some professional anxiety at every level, in every position. And I certainly do. You still got to push on, and you still got to be confident, and give it 100% and then some. But I think probably the first time I really felt that, was at West Point when the academics started. I remember the first summer I was kind of looking around like, man, this guy can't do any push-ups. How do you get into West Point? and then you get in the classroom and you're like, oh, I know how he got here. He's really smart. And I thought I was smart. I did okay in high school, and and now I'm the dumbest guy in every class. I remember when Colonel Foster was encouraging me to try the Downing scholarship, and I was like, boss, I'm not a scholar. I barely made it through West Point. And he was like, no, just this is gonna be good for you. Give it a shot. But then I got to Stanford, and holy smokes, those kids, were they deserved to be there, and they made me feel real stupid. So yeah, imposter syndrome, certainly, applied academically, and then, every unit you get to, there's somebody who's better, there's somebody who's got more experience. I remember, first time you pull a jump master duty, or, the first time you know, you're on the X, for a big mission, or you get asked to do something that, you know, you used to think was only for those kinds of people, and I'm not one of those kind of people yet, but it's good to have that anxiety, because it makes you want to dig in, and ask the people around you for their feedback, and then try to summon the courage to get after it.
Yeah. I think you're equal a book junkie that I am. I'm reading this one right now. It's called The Right Call, and it's about Sally Jenkins and what sports teach us about work and life. Obviously, I'm a sports junkie as well, but in it, I'm about quarter of the way through, and it talks about all these people that are the most elite athletes, right, or coaches. She refers to Andy Reid a ton in it, and it's the confidence to make those right calls at the right moment, right?
Yeah.
It's all due to preparation. So when you take, imposter syndrome, and you start to think, do I belong here? Do I belong in this? Can I handle the responsibilities at which that somebody believes I have the potential, to do? How do you get that confidence, and how do you be humble? Through preparation, right? It's the will to prepare, to spend hours and ask everybody that's around you, or find those experts, or read something, or reach out to somebody, or to go, can I watch how you did it, how you're doing it? And be humble enough to say, I don't know half the answers. And I think that preparation is what then allows you to be more confident when it's time to make some of those tough calls.
Yeah, 100%. I'm trying to think of who said it, but it might have been from that book. But Coach K or somebody, saying if you're not feeling pressure right now, something's wrong with you. But what's the cure for pressure? It's preparation. We've already done that. Now just be confident and go do it.
Yeah. Preparation. We could talk about preparation for just about everything, like the things that we learn to get good grades in school, or the things to get through some of the grad school, or to get through some of the tough training exercises. Preparation becomes, all of it. But with preparation comes a cost, right? There's cost that comes with that. Like I have to go away from my family for a little while in order to prepare for this training exercise, or to prepare my unit. I got to go away for several weeks, and there's so much opportunity cost that comes with preparing yourself, your unit, your family, whatever it might be. Talk about like opportunity costs, and how, that's kind of, you've managed that between your work, your family, your life over the last few years.
Yeah. Opportunity cost is a theme that, I come back to often when I'm trying to make decisions, because every opportunity has a cost, even the good ones. And, sometimes it's like you said, if there might be a great opportunity career wise, but, it's not great for the family, or there might be a great opportunity for the family, but it's not good for the career, or, there's opportunities, day to day about, oh man, it was like a triggering word for me as a commander when, a company commander would come to me and say, hey, sir, I got this opportunity, and like, oh boy, because, our long range training calendar is already packed, and we don't have time for these opportunities to go, fill in the blank with the good idea that, somebody's buddy down the road, and some other special unit had for them, and so, first thing, you always got to do when somebody comes to you with a quote unquote opportunities, you got to think about, okay, well, what are the costs? What are the risks? What do we really need to be doing right now? And let's start there. What do we need to be doing right now? Okay, can we, consider this other opportunity? If we do, what are the risks associated? Who owns those? Maybe there's some financial cost. Who's going to pay that? Can we afford it? So on and so forth. And so, I think those are good lenses. And then definitely, on a just personal and kind of family level, it's wise to, evaluate every opportunity based on, the potential costs, and there's risk rewards too, cost benefit analysis. It's all, things that we do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. The one of the things that me and you always talk about whenever we're going through something, or whenever, we're talking through like something that one of the two of us is kind of trying to decide upon, or how to handle, or, something we heard from a podcast, we heard somebody say, we're like, and we, sometimes we agree with some of the things, and sometimes we don't agree 100%. But I love that about our relationship, is that I can throw it at you and be like, what do you think about this? Like, this is how I'm seeing it. Am I seeing it a different way? Do you see it a different way? And give me some of that advice, on how you do that. And I think that when you think about like the different ways to approach, how to look at something from a problem solving, standpoint, what is some of those things that you look at when it's time to make a big decision? It's time to make a big call. It's time to, make a tough choice, maybe whether it becomes your life or your career or advice to, somebody. Do you have a process that you kind of use when it comes to handling those kind of situations?
Yeah, I think that it sort of depends, if it's going to be like a personal decision, or, something at work. But, those kind of frameworks that we just discussed about, risk versus reward, opportunity, versus cost, and then, you know, running those by your priorities, the priorities that I described at the very beginning, faith, family, and service, and, and then, try your best to, a lot of times, talking to somebody like you, or, a mentor, or your spouse, or, my kids are getting old enough now that when we have family decisions, we come together and we have, and sometimes we even vote, and we pray, and we seek the Lord, and his, guidance and wisdom on some of these things that, sometimes you just get to like, I just don't know. I don't know what's the best thing here,
Yeah.
and so you just pray for, either doors to be opened or doors to be closed, and just keep trying to, navigate that path, as best you can.
Yeah. I one of the phrases I've been using recently is like, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. And it's this, we'll know what we need to do when we get to the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
Another one I've been using a lot lately is this: I don't know exactly where I'm going, over the next few years, but I know exactly how I'm going to get there.
Lion tracker.
Yeah. Yeah. The Lion's Tracker's Guide to Life, right? I don't know exactly how I'm going to find it, and I don't know exactly where I'm going to be, 10 years from now, but I know precisely the way I'm going to spend my days, and precisely what I'm going to be doing when I do get to that location, that place. You've given me so many, like every time we talk, it's like, there's another book that's about life, and how, people are like, well, I like to study autobiographies, or I like to study history, but what I like to study and listen to how people think, and how they live their life the most, that strength to strengths, and then the Lion Tracker's Guide to Life. Like, those are two that I've read over and over and over again, or listened to those moments over again, because, I think there's such a similarity to like the way you live your life to the way you approach your career.
Yeah. Just for your listeners, I don't know if you've talked about Lion Tracker's Guide to Life on your podcast before, but that's one of my that's probably my most recommended book. And if you guys listen to Tim Ferriss, he introduced me to the guy named Boyd Vardy, through his podcast. Boyd Vardy's a guy from South Africa who grew up literally tracking lions on this wildlife preserve, and he uses lion tracking as a metaphor for finding your, he calls it your wild self, or your purpose, I guess would be a different way to say it. But I think to your point, Matt, that line from that book about, I don't know where I'm going, but I know exactly how to get there. I've used that sometimes at work with MDMP, or, some of these processes of like, hey, let's not just get straight to the X. Like, let's do the process, and that's going to show us,
Mm-hmm.
how we're going to get to the X, and, but it's also true for, whether you're wrestling with a big, family decision or whatever. It's like, I don't know where we're going, but I know how we're going to get there. And how we're going to get there is we're going to, we're going to talk about it, and we're going to pray about it, and we're going to, make the best decision we can. And then he also in that book talks a lot about, you know, just looking for that first track, and then that next first track, and that next
Yeah, the first track.
get me, I mean, my last deployment to Afghanistan is a good example. Sometimes you get in these spaces where you have no idea, what the next day or the next week is gonna be like. You just do the right thing, and then do the next right thing, and then do the next right thing, and hopefully that's gonna get you, to where you want to be eventually.
Yeah, there's so many different people that talk about like examples about how to, if you don't know what the long-term solution is, do you know what the next step is? What do you get? What's the next 5 feet look like? And if you just keep approaching that and start moving, you'll make some progress and it's improvement. Hey, the way I usually, the way we want to kind of wrap things up here today is, we talk about what we wanted to be known for, or, some people say like, what's your legacy? You handed me that book years ago. And, when it first came out and you said, this is going to be the hotness, is going to be legacy, the All Blacks. And, it's not just about like, what's your personal legacy? It's about like, what's your organization's legacy, or what's your reputation? And the organization or the team that you are a part of, your family's reputation, right? You can take all those kind of and bucket them similarly because they are similar, right? A lot of times if you're the commander of an organization, your reputation will become the reputation of that organization, or vice versa, relatively quickly over time. And and when I think about like, something that I wanted to be known for, or I do want to be known for, or my purpose is to help people have a better life, and to help people in some way, shape, or form, both in the Army and outside the Army, to have a little bit better of a life, simply because maybe I was around, or because of something I could kind of help them with, right? And our greatest opportunity in life to help people is to help the people that we used to be, and so I feel like the calling to help people that are just coming into the Army, or thinking about the Army, or raising a family in the Army, or deciding to stick around in the military for a little bit longer. Like, those are the people that I can help the most, simply because of, I got to live through those things, and I got a lot of the experience with those things. And I know that's something that I've wanted to be known for. What is something that you thought about, like what you want to be known for, or maybe a potential legacy that or a reputation that you're kind of working towards? Because we're both, we're both closer to the tail end of our careers, definitely not our life, but towards the end of our career than we are towards the front end of our career.
Yeah, I think it's similar to my answer is similar to my answer to your first question about, what do you hope people think about when they hear your name? And I hope that my legacy is similar to, just to that, and to those priorities, faith and family and service. But, I also think that, as I, imagine, what I want the particular unit that I'm about to, lead or be a part of, I'm always coming back to, the concept of team or team of teams, and, being a good teammate, building, the best team that you can. I loved, and I know you did too, growing up playing sports, and especially team sports, and, what better feeling than, being on the best team, and that's why we all love, watching sports and cheering for our teams. Is, I think we all, have that. you know Sebastian Junger, his book Tribe, really explains a lot of that. And, he talks about it, similar to Lencioni, but he talks about it, in three things. He says competence, authenticity, and, connectiveness or connection with others. And so I think if we can be that, individually, we can be competent, and we can be authentic, and we can be connected to others, then it'll be contagious, within the organizations that we're in. Maybe it's not the military, maybe it's just your church, or maybe it's you know, your neighborhood, or, your group of buddies that like to go surfing together, but, just being a good teammate, and then, helping build those good teams is really, in or out of the Army, what I think that, I'm going to stay committed to, and hopefully that's the legacy.
Yeah. Well, brother, I really appreciate, so much for me to be able to kind of fire a bunch of these questions at you over and over and over, in a bunch of different topics. And I appreciate how you just kind of let me just get right into it and start,
Yeah.
asking some of these questions, and sharing some of the things that you had to share. Was there anything that you had hoped we had talked about today that didn't come up in one of those kind of questions or topics?
I think we covered, so much. And one thing that I did mention, but I just want to expand on, briefly. I actually first got this notion of adventures in good company from listening to Rob Shaw on your podcast, and he referenced a speech by John McCain. I think it's worth, for the listeners, just reading, the whole quote from John McCain. He said, in this speech that he gave at the Naval Academy right before he died, he was talking about his service, and he talked about, why he served, and it just resonated with me, and I want to share it. He said, "Many of you will risk everything for your country. You will make sacrifices for your fellow Americans who won't be asked to make sacrifices for you. That's your calling. Thank you for accepting it. I promise there will be compensations for the hard times you endure. You will have lives of adventure. You will have the best company, and you will know a satisfaction far more sublime than pleasure." And I think, friends like you, the opportunities to serve in the organizations that we've described, and do some of the things that you mentioned, they're all kind of marked by that, adventure and good company. And, I hope I can pay some of that forward, just by, encouraging others to serve, in a similar way. And, as you have, pass that on to our kids.
Yeah. Well, I can promise you that we have a lot of, whether it be in the Army or outside the Army, that there's still a ton of fuel in both of our tanks, and there's a lot of adventures coming our way, and there's a lot more good company coming our way over the next few years and for the rest of our lives. Because like what you talked about with the strength, we are finding the second strength of the things that are going to get us through the second half of our lives, and I'm super encouraged to be doing the second strengths with people like you going forward.
Yeah. And, the other thing that I wanted to just say before we close is, there's this narrative out there that this younger generation, you know, doesn't have it, or, you can say what you want about these guys, but, having just, watched a whole bunch of them, you know, join the Ranger Regiment, and it's not just the ones that join the Ranger Regiment, just watching, my son's high school football practice. I mean, there are some awesome kids who, they have grit, and they want to do the right things for the right reasons. And, these guys are going to be doing all the stuff that we just described, long after, we are, and they're ready to carry that torch. And so, I just want to remind everybody who, might hear or, believe that narrative that, the next generation isn't as good as previous. These guys are awesome, and they can definitely do it, and they will.
Yeah, I would echo that from my times visiting Ryan up at West Point, and having those cadets come out here to visit at Schofield Barracks, and the lieutenants that are showing up to these organizations, and the young NCOs that are showing up to our organizations, that we are in good hands going forward, and the people that are out there are better than I was when I was an NCO. The junior officers are smarter, faster. They're all stronger, than we ever were growing up. So I wouldn't buy into any of the notions that we were better back then than they are today. I wouldn't buy into that for a second. So our nation is in good hands with the people coming forward, brother.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, brother.
Yeah, well, thank you, man. It's been awesome having you on today. Our families, will have a lot more opportunities to kind of now see each other here going forward, and I really appreciate you sharing this. You've been sharing this shit with me for so many years, and you kind of you will be. But thanks for sharing some of it with some of our listeners.
Thanks for including me. I meant to say that up front. How humbling and, how much of an honor it is to be asked to do this. Thanks for not making me give my resume or tell war stories or talk too much about the future.
You bet, brother. Of course. It's my pleasure. And I'm the lucky one to get a chance to get your undivided attention on a Friday afternoon where you should be. Get back to the boys, get back to Tanya. I hope you guys have a great Friday night and a great weekend, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right, bro.
All right.
Awesome talking.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye. Thanks for listening today. I hope we sparked some thoughts about the people that have inspired you to be who you are today. I hope you share some of your thoughts, and better yet, demonstrate them for the people in your life. Our pursuit is to get a little bit better every day. Progress equals small victories stacked on top of each other, building like compound interest. Keep stacking these positive habits. Habits like getting up early, working your butt off, learning something new, being positive, and surrounding yourself with phenomenal people. Please share your comments at the links in the show notes, and DM us at Teach Me to Fish podcast on Instagram or Facebook. Looking forward to our next conversation.
Times don't fly too high. Be sure to keep the ground in sight. Fly forever if you keep it tight. Love the world, but keep the sky on your mind.